Democrats searching for policy ideas and a good candidate to run against President Trump in 2020. Some who are considering a run were at a forum yesterday testing out messages. Watch.
My neighbors, my residents are incredible folk who work hard as anything. In fact, I would argue they're working harder than many of their parents did, but they're making less money.
I do think this election calls for bold ideas, and I think the women have to be speaking out about the things that they want.
Medicare for all, universal child care, debt-free college, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, gun reform, invest in clean energy, expand Social Security, rebuild our infrastructure, break up the banks, bring back the unions.
Colin Reed is a senior vice president of Definers Public Affairs and a columnist for the Boston Herald. Richard Fowler is a radio talk show host and Fox News contributor, both good friends. Certainly, Elizabeth Warren has given this a lot of thought, Colin, and I know that you know her well, given that you know the Massachusetts and Boston, certainly. Let me read to you something that Dana Milbank wrote. He's a columnist for the Washington Post. I always read him. He was at that event yesterday, and he said, for November's midterm elections, it may be enough for Democrats to say they are against Trump, but to beat Trump, they'll need more. Trump convinced tens of millions of Americans that they are losing ground because of immigrants, racial and religious minorities, and foreigners. What will Democrats advance to counter that grim message? And did you hear it in what Elizabeth Warren was saying? Colin, I'll go to you first.
Well, I think it's true, Dana, that before we get to 2020, we can look to 2018 as an instruction manual for how the Democrats are going to run. And in 2018, it is going to be a referendum on Trump. That's their only message. They don't have an economic message. I think a lot of Democrats would admit that. And I don't know that it's going to work in 2018, especially with an economy going the way it is, and also with the Democrats nominating Bernie Sanders acolytes in places like Nebraska last night.
Richard, I want to ask you two things. One is the economic message what Nancy Pelosi has suggested, which is to roll back the tax package that President Trump was able to advance in December? And secondly, do any of these people matter when they're going to one of these forums to try to test the waters for 2020 if Bernie Sanders is indeed going to run again?
Well, to answer your first question, I think that to some extent Nancy Pelosi is right. Part of it is rolling back the tax package. The other part is the Democratic Party's better deal, right? And that's what you heard Conor Lamb talk about when he ran for Congress this past March, was this idea of how do we fix health care, not of the Affordable Care Act, but how do we fix health care based on the employer-based side, people who get health care through their employer who are seeing the health care premiums go up. But to answer your second question, I think it is way too premature to think about 2020 already, seeing that, remember, this time in 2014, Donald Trump wasn't even on the radar, and now he's the president of the United States. But Democrats have to do a couple things going into this this midterm election and going into the general. Have a conversation with the American people about health care, and on top of that, have a conversation with the American people about the issues concerning them at their kitchen tables, people's pension funds, fixing public education. North Carolina is the next state to go out on a statewide teacher strike this week. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Colin, the Democrats put out this document called A Better Deal. I actually read it, and there's some good policy in there. One of the things I saw that is frustrating Democrats is that other places on cable news will not talk about this deal because they're obsessed with the Russia coverage. Do the Democrats, have they actually boxed themselves in by talking about the Russia investigation so much that they can't actually get attention for the policies that they want to put forward?
They have banked everything on this Russia investigation, and if it comes back and Bob Mueller's investigation says that there was nothing there, then the Democrats are in a terrible spot politically because they have placed so much political capital on it. But the bigger point they have, and I have to take issue with one thing, that Conor Lamb did not talk about the better way. Conor Lamb talked about how he wasn't going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, and that's the only reason he was able to win in a district like Pennsylvania 18. And she remains their biggest liability, and she's made it clear she's not going anywhere. So she's a huge impediment for the Democrats to go anywhere.
A quick last word from you, Richard.
I think it's naive to synthesize down what Conor Lamb did to one issue. Remember, he also talked about labor pension funds to coal miners as well in that race, is why he won. But yeah, I think you're right, Dana, that because of this Russia collusion thing and the fact that the president keeps tweeting about it, the Democrats haven't been able to focus on their Better Way campaign, which talks about how we lower the cost of prescription drugs, which talks about about how we fix early childhood education, which talks about how we fund public education so teachers don't have to go out on strike in another state.
Richard, I'm going to have you back, and I'm going to take the last word here, because in all that you're saying, I understand that those things resonate very well with the base. But for voters who voted for President Obama and then decided to vote for President Trump, I don't hear what the Democrats have from an economic message to capture those voters and bring them back to the Democratic camp. They're wrapping me, so I got the last word. Sorry about that, guys. Colin Reed and Richard Fowler, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.